Every week here, the team at Assembly Required has been combing through your emails, which have been very kind, the personal essays, and the questions that you've been sending us. And I'd like to address a few listener questions now. From Rebecca Whitman. If something like Roe v. Wade can be overturned and Republicans are threatening to do away with the ACA, then what does that mean for something like the Americans with Disabilities Act? Rebecca, thank you so much for this question. I want to tell folks to keep in mind that when we hear about attacks on DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, that includes things like the Americans with Disabilities Act. Those are one of the protected classes that diversity, equity, and inclusion actually protect. And the reality is, as we have discovered, again, with the Dobbs decision in Roe v. Wade, with the erosion of the Voting Rights Act, federal protections can be overturned or weakened. We know that some companies have actually expressed irritation with complying with accessibility requirements. So that means the ADA is not immune. Another aspect is that the Chevron deference decision from the Supreme Court earlier this year may also have an impact because much of the Americans with Disabilities Act is subject to regulatory interpretation. What that means is that instead of saying do this and that and the other specifically in the statute said, here are all of these agencies and they need to interpret what has to be done because the world doesn't remain static. What that means is that the federal government may now decide that it doesn't want to enforce components of the ADA, and that means they can weaken it without ever having to overturn it. However, as the conversation with Rachel pointed out, we have other options. For example, states can still provide protections. Remember that even if the federal government doesn't protect it, if they overturn something, unless they forbid actions, states can still take steps to strengthen laws, including laws protecting the disabled. So our job is to understand that, yes, there is a threat, and yes, there are challenges, but we still have a way to respond. Nancy Collins asked, so how do you find the strength to keep doing what you do, to build a coalition, to lead with compassion instead of reacting in anger? Okay, Nancy, I get angry. And let me be clear, anger is valid. So is despair. But neither can be your leading emotion or your permanent condition. Compassion requires that we understand not only those who are impacted, but what might be driving someone to take the steps to create harm. So compassion isn't just for us. It's also about how we understand those we are opposing. I'm always galvanized by determination. I take action and I don't stop because I'm determined to make things better, because I know what it feels like when things are wrong. But I'm always informed by compassion. Compassion meaning what's the impact of the harm, but also what is gnawing at another person that would make them do something that feels mean and petty and small. And that compassion helps me understand what I need to do to push back. And that's a strength. Being able to navigate that, to push back and to not be overwhelmed is a strength we all hold. We just have to find it. And you mentioned coalitions. I like having friends with me, especially when I try to do something hard. That's what a coalition is. And coalitions don't always have to agree about the core idea. They have to agree on the core intent. So we don't have to come together for the same reason, but we all have to have the same outcome in mind. And as long as we can do that, coalitions hold. And there's strength always in those numbers.